My name is Lauren Mitchell. I'm 29 and I work as an MRI technologist in Nashville, which means my days are built around other people's emergencies, quiet panic, and the kind of pressure that teaches you how to stay calm while your world is shaking. That skill came in handy the afternoon my father decided to erase me from his house, like I had never lived there. I was halfway through a 5-mile run, sweat freezing at the back of my neck in the December wind, when my phone buzzed 3 times in a row. The first message was from my father. "We sold your bed, desk, and everything in your room for $750. Your cousin needs it for her baby. Want to come home for Christmas? Buy us a new living room set. $3,200 cash. Otherwise, stay away. We already changed the locks and gave your key to her." Before I could even process that, my mother added, "By the way, we told everyone at church you abandoned us for your rich boyfriend. Whole congregation thinks you're ungrateful trash. Pay up, or we'll tell them you hit me last Christmas." Then my sister chimed in like it was all some family group joke. "The neighbors already think you're on drugs. Want us to confirm it?" I stood on the sidewalk with my lungs burning, and realized this wasn't just cruelty. It was coordinated, planned. They hadn't only sold my things. They had built a story where I was the villain. And they expected me to pay admission just to enter the house they locked me out of. So instead of driving home, I made one turn, then another, and headed somewhere they never thought I would go first. But before I tell you what I showed her and why my father was screaming by sundown, tell me what time it is for you right now and where you are watching from. I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The drive to my grandmother's house took 40 minutes and I don't remember half of it. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my palms ached. I remember stopping at a red light and realizing I was still wearing my running gloves, like my body hadn't caught up to what my family had just done. Mostly, I remember the feeling that hit me somewhere between mile marker 12 and her subdivision. Not heartbreak, not even rage at first, but clarity. My father hadn't snapped. My mother hadn't said something careless in the heat of an argument. My sister hadn't made one cruel joke too many. They had made a decision together. Sell my room, change the locks, hand my key to my cousin, spread lies through church, threaten a false abuse story if I didn't hand over cash. That wasn't family dysfunction. That was extortion with Christmas wrapping paper on it. When I pulled into my grandmother's driveway, her porch light was already on. She always kept it on before dark because she said a lit porch told good people they were welcome and bad people they were visible. I walked inside, still in my running clothes, hair a mess, cheeks red from the cold, and she took one look at my face and didn't ask if I wanted coffee. She asked, "What did they do now?" I handed her my phone without a word. She sat in her recliner, reading each message slowly, the way she used to read medication labels after my grandfather got sick. Careful and exact, because details mattered. The deeper she read, the straighter she sat. By the time she got to the line about telling the church I hit my mother, her mouth had gone tight in a way I hadn't seen since my uncle tried to borrow money from her and forge her signature on a loan form 15 years earlier. "Say this out loud," she said. "All of it." So I did. I told her about the room I still kept at my parents' place because I worked long shifts and sometimes stayed there after late holiday dinners. I told her about the quilt she'd sewn me, the cedar chest at the end of the bed, the desk where I studied for my MRI boards, the watch she had left me that I begged them not to touch. When I said they sold that too, she closed her eyes for 3 full seconds. Then she asked the question that changed everything. "Did your father remember whose house he's living in?" That was the part my parents always counted on people forgetting. My grandmother, Eleanor Brooks, owned the house. Not morally, not symbolically, legally. Years ago, after my grandfather died, she let my parents move into the property for a little while so they could recover from a string of bad business decisions and the kind of polished Sunday image adulthood that looked respectable from a church pew and reckless everywhere else. A little while turned into 11 years, 11 Christmases, 11 tax seasons. 11 years of my father acting like temporary shelter was the same thing as authority. They paid reduced rent when they felt like it, skipped it when they didn't, and slowly began speaking about the place as if my grandmother's generosity had somehow expired into their ownership. My room had once been my uncle's office. The nursery they were now clearing out for my cousin's baby had originally been my grandmother's sewing room, where she used to hem choir robes and make baby blankets for half the county. My father loved behaving like king of a castle that still had someone else's name on every serious document attached to it. My grandmother didn't speak for nearly a full minute after I answered her question. She just stood there looking toward the hallway like she was mentally walking through every year she had excused, every late payment she had overlooked, every warning sign she had folded up and tucked away because she wanted peace more than confrontation. Then she turned, went to the hallway cabinet, and pulled out a slim blue folder. Property tax records, lease addendums, insurance copies, notes from conversations my father probably assumed no one had written down, a draft notice she had typed months earlier and never sent because she still believed shame might do the work consequences eventually had to do. She laid them across the coffee table with the precision of a woman setting out instruments before surgery. Then she looked up at me and said, "Call Jessica. You shouldn't be alone tonight." Jessica Nolan had been my best friend since we were 17. She was the kind of person who never wasted time asking whether something really happened that way when a manipulative family had already shown its hand in writing. She believed screenshots the way some people believe weather alerts. When I called and told her the basics, she didn't say, "Do you want me to come?" She said, "I'm leaving now." While we waited, my grandmother kept reading the screenshots one by one and asked questions I hadn't even thought to answer because I was still reacting emotionally while she had already moved into strategy. Had they admitted selling the watch in writing? Yes. Had they demanded money as a condition of letting me return? Yes. Had they threatened to spread or escalate false accusations if I refused? Yes. Had they transferred access to the property by giving my key to someone else? Yes. Was there any chance they could claim it was all sarcasm or some family joke taken out of context? Not with the way they phrased it. Every answer seemed to harden something in her. When Jessica arrived, she came with Thai takeout, a legal pad, 2 phone chargers, and the expression of a woman who had wanted a valid reason to dislike my family professionally for years. We sat at the dining table under the yellow pendant light and built a timeline. We wrote down dates, times, exact wording, who said what, and what had been threatened. We backed up screenshots to 3 places. I forwarded everything into a dedicated email folder. Jessica told me to stop deleting old texts from my parents because people like this always think their pattern disappears if the latest message is dramatic enough. Then I made a list of what had been in that room. The bed frame I bought during my first year working nights. The antique mirror my grandmother gave me after I got my first apartment. The cedar chest at the foot of the bed. The desk where I studied for my MRI boards. The lamp my late aunt had given me. The quilt my grandmother sewed when I was 19. The sketchbooks I hadn't touched in years but couldn't replace. The box of letters from my grandfather. And the watch. When I got to that part, my throat tightened so badly I had to stop and stare at the table for a second, because the truth was the room wasn't valuable because of the furniture. It was valuable because it contained the evidence that I had existed there as a daughter, not merely as an inconvenience they could bill later. The desk held the version of me who worked through school. The bed held the version of me who came home exhausted after 12-hour shifts and still tried to show up for people. The watch held the one promise in that family that had never felt conditional. My grandmother had left it to me specifically, not because it was expensive, though it was worth something, but because she knew I understood care, maintenance, time, and responsibility better than anyone else in that house. Selling it wasn't just theft. It was a message. Halfway through the list, I put my pen down and said, "I can't believe they thought I'd pay them after this." Jessica looked at me for a second and answered, "They didn't think you'd pay because it was reasonable. They thought you'd pay because they've spent years training you to confuse guilt with duty." The room went silent after that. She was right, and all 3 of us knew it. My father didn't want a sofa. He wanted proof that humiliation still worked. He wanted me to purchase my way back into a role I had been trying to outgrow since college. The daughter who absorbed the insult, fixed the mess, smoothed the story over, and called it family loyalty. At 6:14 p.m., my phone started ringing. Dennis Brooks, my father. I stared at the screen long enough for the vibration to stop, then start again. My grandmother nodded once, and I answered on speaker. The first thing he said was not hello. It was not even anger exactly. It was fear dressed up as accusation. What exactly did you tell your grandmother? The sound of his voice told me more than the words did. He wasn't calling to argue from strength. He was calling from panic. The kind that leaks through before a person remembers to make themselves sound offended instead of cornered. I leaned back in my grandmother's kitchen chair and let him hear nothing but silence for 1 second. Then 2. Just long enough for him to understand I was no longer racing to reassure him. Then I said, I told her the truth. He exploded immediately, as if volume could still function as evidence. You went crying to an old woman who doesn't understand the full picture. Kayla needs space. Families help each other. You always make everything look ugly when it doesn't go your way. It almost would have worked if I had still been the version of myself they remembered. The one who used to waste whole holidays trying to phrase basic boundaries gently enough for unreasonable people. But that woman had worked too many overnight hospital shifts, guided too many claustrophobic patients through panic, and paid too many of her own bills to let a man like my father narrate reality just because he spoke first and loudest. You sold my property, I said, keeping my voice even. You changed the locks on a house you do not own. You handed my key to someone else. You demanded money in exchange for letting me come home for Christmas. You threatened to lie and say I hit Mom. You told church members I abandoned the family for a rich boyfriend who does not exist. Which part would you like me to make prettier for Eleanor? For 3 seconds, he said nothing. Then he tried a new tactic. We were under stress. You know how your mother gets. Kayla is pregnant. We're trying to support family and you're acting like we robbed a stranger. From beside me, Jessica quietly wrote the word admission on the legal pad and underlined it twice. That was when my mother's voice cut in from somewhere near the phone. Not loud, but sharp and nervous. Don't say it like that. Which told me she had been standing there listening the whole time, hoping he could bully me back into silence before she had to hear the evidence read aloud. Then, farther away, my sister Brianna's voice drifted in with that same mean little amusement she always used when she thought someone else was taking the real risk. Ask her if she wants the watch back. That did it. Not for me. For my grandmother. She stood up, took the phone from my hand, and the entire energy of the kitchen changed. Eleanor Brooks did not raise her voice. She did not need to. In a tone so calm it felt dangerous, she said, Dennis, you have 30 days to vacate my property. You will receive formal notice tomorrow morning. You will not sell, remove, gift, or destroy another item from that house that does not belong to you. You will not contact church members with one more lie about Lauren. And if the watch you sold cannot be recovered, you can explain to an attorney why you disposed of property specifically left to her. Do you understand me? There was a beat of total silence on the line, followed by my father backpedaling so fast I could practically hear the collapse of his self-importance in real time. Now, Miss Eleanor, come on. That's not necessary. We were joking. It was family banter. Lauren knows how we talk. She's always been sensitive. And I think maybe she framed this in a way. My grandmother cut him off. No. What Lauren knows is exactly how you talk. That is why you are now begging. Then she hung up. The room went still. I should have felt victorious right then. But what I actually felt was something stranger. Like the air after a storm when the trees are still shaking, and your body hasn't realized the lightning has already passed. My hands were trembling under the table, not because I regretted telling her, but because some deep old reflex in me still expected punishment for exposing a family secret. That's how those systems work. They train you to think the real crime is not the humiliation, the theft, or the threat. The real crime in their minds is naming it where someone stronger can hear. My phone lit up again almost instantly. Mom. I let it ring out. Then Brianna texted. You really ran to Grandma? Pathetic. Before I could respond, another message popped up. The neighbors already think you're unstable. Want me to tell them about the pills in your bag too? I stared at it for a second, then typed back, do it. And your landlord gets screenshots proving you all changed locks on a property Grandma owns. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, then nothing. That was the first time I could remember my sister threatening me, and then deciding silence was safer. A minute later, my mother left a voicemail, then another. In the first, she cried and said I was twisting everything. In the second, the crying was gone and the guilt started. I hope you're happy doing this to your father right before Christmas. That line used to work on me. It used to send me spiraling into apology mode, scanning my own behavior for whatever tiny angle might justify theirs. But something in me had shifted while sitting at my grandmother's table, watching the documents come out, hearing the threats read back in adult language instead of family language. Once extortion is called extortion, it stopped sounding like a misunderstanding. My grandmother sat down again and looked at me over the rim of her reading glasses. You need to hear this tonight, she said. You did not cause this by telling the truth. People always blame the messenger when the message exposes the theft. Then she slid the blue folder toward me and tapped the top page. Tomorrow you're going with me. No more private phone calls, no more hallway ambushes, no more letting them explain reality to you. We are going there in daylight with paperwork, and they are going to hear their own words read back to them. Jessica leaned over, stole one bite of my untouched pad thai, and said, honestly, I've been waiting years for someone in this family to discover the consequences section of the Bible. I laughed then, not because it was funny, exactly, but because sometimes the first clean breath after betrayal comes out sounding like a laugh. And that was the moment I finally understood something my father never had. He thought control came from locks, keys, gossip, and access. He thought whoever controlled the doorway controlled the person outside it. What he hadn't calculated was this. The minute I stopped begging to be let back in, every tool he had left started looking like evidence. The next morning, I didn't go to my parents' house alone. I went with Eleanor Brooks, wearing navy slacks and a wool coat, carrying a folder of printouts and enough documentation to make every lie in that house feel smaller than it had the day before. Jessica met us there on her lunch break because she said nobody should confront a family like mine without a witness and snacks. When we pulled into the driveway, Kayla's car was already there, along with my sister Brianna's Jeep. My mother, Cheryl, opened the front door before we even knocked. And for a split second, the look on her face reminded me of every child who ever got caught reaching for a hot stove after being told not to. Behind her stood my father, Dennis, trying to wear dignity like a jacket he'd outgrown. Kayla sat on the couch rubbing her belly dramatically, and Brianna leaned against the wall with her arms crossed, ready to turn the whole thing into a performance if there was still an audience left to impress. My grandmother didn't wait to be invited in. Sit down, she said. And somehow 4 grown adults did exactly that. Dennis launched into his explanation before anyone asked. There's been a misunderstanding. We were only making room for Kayla's baby because Lauren barely stays here anymore. We figured family items should go where they're needed. I almost laughed at the phrase family items. My board exam notes were not community property. My bed wasn't a donation bin. My dead grandmother's watch wasn't a coupon code. Eleanor turned to me. Read the messages. So I did out loud every word. I read the demand for the $3,200 living room set. The part about staying away for Christmas. The line about the church thinking I was ungrateful trash. The threat to tell people I hit my mother. The smug note from Brianna about drugs. Something changed in the room while I read. Lies are easier to defend in fragments. Read back in full, they sound exactly like what they are. Dennis kept trying to interrupt, but my grandmother shut him down with one lifted finger. When I finished, Kayla muttered, I didn't know they wrote all that. Brianna snapped, "Oh please. Don't start acting innocent now." Then the whole thing cracked open. Cheryl tried to cry. Dennis tried to redirect. Brianna tried to attack me for always running to rich people and old people whenever life gets hard. That would have been interesting if I were dating anyone at all, much less some imaginary rich boyfriend they invented to explain why I had moved out and become less controllable. I looked directly at my mother. "Did you tell church members I hit you?" Her eyes darted. "I said you grabbed my arm last year during an argument." "No," I said. "You tripped over the nativity box in the garage and blamed me because I left dinner early." Jessica, bless her, coughed into her hand to hide a laugh. My father stood up then, pointing at me as if volume could resurrect authority. "You've always been selfish. Everything is always about your room, your shifts, your schedule, your stress. Kayla is having a baby. Family sacrifice." I stood too. Families don't sell a daughter's inheritance to furnish someone else's crisis. Families don't lock her out, then charge admission to come home for Christmas. Families don't weaponize church gossip and false abuse claims because they want a sofa. No one spoke. Even Brianna looked away. Then my grandmother placed the formal 30-day notice on the coffee table. "You have until the end of next month," she said. "You will also provide Lauren a written inventory of every item sold, gifted, moved, or destroyed. If the watch cannot be returned, Dennis can explain to a judge why he sold property that was specifically bequeathed to her." My father's face lost color. That was the first moment I saw it. Not guilt, not love, not remorse, fear. Real fear, not of hurting me, of consequences. By that evening, the story they had built about me started collapsing faster than I expected. Small-town church gossip works like wildfire until it hits a stone wall of receipts. Apparently, my mother had called 3 women from church the previous night, hoping to get ahead of whatever I might say. Unfortunately for her, one of those women was married to the attorney who handled my grandmother's estate updates, and another had known me since I was 12, and had watched me leave youth group early for hospital volunteer shifts. While my sister collected praise for mission photos, she barely attended. Once my grandmother told 2 people the truth, they told 2 more. And by dinner time, the version of events floating through the congregation was no longer poor parents abandoned by an ungrateful daughter. It was grown adults sold their daughter's belongings, lied about abuse, and got eviction papers from the homeowner. Dennis called me 12 times. Cheryl texted me paragraphs that started with, "I'm sorry you're upset," and somehow got worse from there. Brianna sent one message that simply said, "You ruined Christmas." I stared at it for a full 10 seconds before replying, "No, I ruined your leverage." Then I blocked her for the night. The hardest part, weirdly enough, wasn't dealing with them. It was sorting through what had been done to me for so long that I had stopped naming it. That night, I sat on my grandmother's guest bed. An actual bed with a frame still under it, which felt strange enough to notice, and made 2 lists. One was practical. Replace ID copies, contact local pawn shops about the watch, ask neighbors if anyone saw furniture being removed, change mailing address, document every threat. The other list was uglier. Every time my parents used embarrassment as discipline, every holiday where Brianna got gifts and I got lectures, every time Kayla needed help and somehow my room, my time, my savings, or my silence became the solution. Once you write a pattern down, it stops feeling like bad luck and starts looking like policy. Around 9:30 p.m., Jessica called and said, "You should know the church women are not on your parents' side." Apparently, Cheryl had tried to tell one of them I was unstable from working hospital nights and maybe not remembering things clearly. That might have landed if I weren't the person they all called when someone's aunt needed a scan scheduled quickly, or when their nephew fainted at football practice, and they wanted to know what ER to trust. Reputation matters in places like that. Mine had been built quietly over years. Theirs was falling apart loudly in 48 hours. But the moment that really changed everything came just before 10. Kayla called me crying. Not fake crying, the messy, breathless kind. "I need you to know," she said. "I never asked for your watch. I didn't even know it was sold. They told me the room had been empty for months, and you said I could use the furniture." I believed her about half of that and said so. She didn't argue. Then she told me something I had not known. Dennis had already promised my room to her in November to keep her from moving in with her boyfriend's parents. He needed her dependent on him because he had borrowed money from her months earlier and hadn't paid it back. Suddenly, the living room set demand made more sense. This wasn't about generosity. My father was shuffling debts and bodies around like furniture, and I had been one more asset to liquidate. When I told my grandmother, she didn't even look surprised. "He's done this before," she said softly. "He just never did it to someone prepared to answer back." That sentence stayed with me. Prepared to answer back. Maybe that was the real difference between 21-year-old me and 29-year-old me. I no longer confused endurance with virtue. I no longer thought keeping family secrets made me loyal. Sometimes the most moral thing you can do is refuse to help a lie survive. Near midnight, my phone lit up with a voicemail preview from Dennis. "Lauren, please call me. We can fix this. Just tell Eleanor you misunderstood. We're begging you. Please." I didn't call. For once, I let silence do the work. The last piece fell into place 2 days later, and it hit my father harder than eviction papers ever could. A neighbor I had known since childhood sent me security footage from a camera mounted over his garage. It showed my father and Brianna loading my furniture into a trailer, laughing, while my mother stood in the yard holding the quilt my grandmother had made. In the video, Dennis actually said, "Sell the nice stuff first. Lauren won't fight. She never does." I watched that clip 3 times. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because it clarified the whole history of us in one sentence. He had counted on my silence the way other people count on a paycheck. I sent the footage to my grandmother, saved a copy to cloud storage, and then, after sitting with it for an hour, I forwarded it to Dennis with one line. "This is why you're not getting an explanation. You're getting consequences." He called within 30 seconds. I let it ring. He called again. Then my mother, then Brianna, then even Cheryl's sister, who never contacted me unless someone needed an apology translated into family values. By then, the watch had also resurfaced. A pawn shop owner in the next county recognized the description because I had sent photos and the engraved initials. My father had sold it under his own driver's license. That mattered, legally, morally, symbolically. The watch was recovered, though I had to pay to hold it until the case sorted out. Jessica covered the fee before I could protest and said, "Merry Christmas. Consider it an investment in justice." When I finally held it again, I cried harder than I had over the bed, the desk, or even the lock change, because the watch had never been about money. My grandmother gave it to me the week I passed my boards and said, "Time doesn't heal everything. What it does is reveal people." She was right. Time had revealed all of them. Dennis, who thought authority meant ownership. Cheryl, who mistook manipulation for motherhood. Brianna, who treated cruelty like charisma. And me, the daughter they kept underestimating because I learned too early how to survive quietly. The formal process moved faster once the footage and pawn record were in hand. My father stopped pretending it was a misunderstanding and switched to begging. Actual begging. He came to my grandmother's house one evening, stood on the porch he used to swagger across at holidays, and asked me to come outside. I did, but only because Eleanor was beside me. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Not humble, small. "Lauren," he said, voice shaking, "please explain to your grandmother that this got out of hand. Please tell her we can stay until spring. Please tell people at church your mother panicked and exaggerated. Please. I'll get your stuff back. I'll do anything." There it was. Not sorrow for what they did, but terror that they were finally the ones with no safe place to stand. I looked at him and realized something almost disappointing. The man who had dominated every room of my childhood was at his core just a bully who had mistaken access for power. Once access was gone, so was the performance. You want me to explain? I said. Fine. Here's the explanation. You thought I needed your house more than I needed my self-respect. You thought I'd pay to be let back into a family that had already sold me in pieces. You thought being my father meant I would always absorb the damage, so you could avoid it. You were wrong. He started crying then, or tried to. I felt nothing except a tired kind of peace. My grandmother stepped forward and told him he needed to leave the property immediately, or she would call the police. He left. No last speech, no dramatic redemption, just a man backing down the steps of a house he never owned. Christmas that year was quiet. I spent it at my grandmother's table with Jessica. 2 casseroles, 1 pecan pie, and absolutely no requirement to earn my seat. And that was the real ending. Not the eviction, not the recovered watch, not even my father begging on the porch. The real ending was understanding that family is not whoever shouts blood while emptying your room. Family is whoever protects your dignity when other people try to price it. I learned that love without respect becomes control. That silence does not keep peace. It only keeps patterns alive. And that walking away is not cruelty when staying requires you to disappear. So if anyone listening has ever been told to pay, lie, shrink, or bleed just to keep a family comfortable, hear me clearly. You are not selfish for drawing a line. You are not disloyal for telling the truth. And you do not have to return to any place that demands your humiliation as rent. My father locked me out and sold my things. Hours later, he was begging me to explain. But by then, I finally understood something he never did. My value was never inside that room. And once I stopped begging to be loved correctly, they lost the only thing they had ever really been using against me. From my perspective, this story is not just about revenge. It is about a woman finally realizing that protecting her peace is more important than protecting toxic people from the consequences of their actions. What makes this story powerful is that Lauren does not win by screaming louder. She wins by staying calm, telling the truth, and refusing to let guilt control her. That kind of strength feels real, mature, and deeply satisfying. Sometimes the best revenge is not cruelty. It is clarity, dignity, and the courage to walk away from people who only value you when they can use you.